They didn't even bother to hide it. A wedding invitation for everyone but me. The envelope sat like a wound on the kitchen counter. My parents' perfect handwriting, carving my absence into permanence. How many times can a family disown you before it becomes tradition? What does a woman owe to a bloodline that erases her name in cursive ink? How long can silence stay loyal before it screams? If love must kneel to be accepted, is it still love? Or just survival in disguise? And when they say you're not invited, are they really saying you were never one of us? I didn't cry. I just stood there, motionless, while something inside me rearranged itself. Something sharp, something final. The next morning I called my mother. Not to ask why, I already knew, but to hear how far she'd go to protect her version of love. Her voice was syruped in politeness, the kind that hurts more than anger. She said, "It's not personal, Elena. We just don't want any tension at the wedding. Tension. That's what they call truth when it makes them uncomfortable." I didn't argue. I just listened. Each word another nail sealing a door that would never open again. Some goodbyes don't happen in tears. They happen in tone. When I hung up, I wasn't angry. Just empty. I remembered the last time I tried to tell her who I was. How she crossed herself like my love was a curse. How my father didn't look at me for a year. How my sister texted, "You'll regret this phase." Maybe I did regret something. Not being strong enough to stop needing them. Back then, I thought distance would heal it. I thought if I worked hard enough, made partner, sent birthday gifts, they'd see I was still their daughter. But love shouldn't have to apply for permission. So I did what I always do. Turned pain into precision. Opened my laptop, drafted a contract, but this time it wasn't for a client. It was for me. By sunset, the decision was clear. I wouldn't send flowers. I wouldn't send a card. I'd send something they'd never forget. Justice. They taught me how to fight for family. They just never thought I'd fight against them. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being the villain in their story. Silence can be a weapon, especially when it's dressed as calm. I went to work the next morning like nothing happened. Smiled in meetings. Quoted clauses. Wore confidence like armor. But underneath, I was unraveling. Every time my phone buzzed, I half hoped it was my father calling to say we made a mistake. He never did. I told myself I didn't care anymore. But lies told in mirrors are the hardest to believe. At lunch, Daniel sat across from me, studying my silence like it was a puzzle. He didn't ask what was wrong. He never had to. He said, "You look like someone memorizing pain." I said, "Maybe I'm just rehearsing for peace. Sometimes the right words don't fix anything. They just make the silence sound softer." That night, I went home and scrolled through old family photos. Holidays, birthdays, all the moments that pretended to be happy. It's strange how love can look perfect in pictures and poisonous in memory. I realized I'd spent years trying to earn space in a story that was never written for me. Then came the call I'd been expecting. My father's voice, stern, rehearsed. He said, "Elena, we heard you've been talking to lawyers. Don't make this worse." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just said, "You already did." After he hung up, I didn't move for a long time. The city hummed outside, unaware that a family was burning quietly inside one woman's heart. That night, I opened the old estate folder. The one I'd promised never to touch. But promises made in pain are meant to be broken. North young to be broken. Before I could fight them, I had to remember where the war began. It wasn't the invitation. It wasn't the silence. It was the night I told the truth. The night I said, "I love her." And they said, "Then you don't love God." Funny how faith can break faster than hearts. That was the first time I understood. Some people don't reject you for being wrong. They reject you for being different. That night, I packed my things. No one stopped me. No one said, "Stay." I drove until the city lights blurred into tears. Slept in my car outside my new office. Ate vending machine dinners and signed my first contract the next morning. Pain teaches you to survive on whatever dignity you have left. Years passed, and success became my language. Partnerships, bonuses, applause from people who didn't know my ghosts. Every case I won felt like revenge. Every settlement a small reclaiming of power. But every night when I took off the suit and the heels, I was still that girl standing at the dinner table, waiting for love that never came. Once, I ran into my mother at a grocery store. She looked surprised, like she'd seen a ghost. We stood between shelves of cereal, pretending to be strangers. She said, "You look well." I said, "You too." We didn't hug. We didn't ask about each other's lives. We just stood there, two women pretending they hadn't lost a lifetime. I thought about that moment now. As I read through their estate papers, every paragraph felt like another ghost from the past whispering, "You don't belong here." But I did. And this time, they would see me. Not as their daughter. Not as their shame. As the lawyer, they taught to never back down. By the fourth day, I'd stopped replaying the hurt. It wasn't grief anymore. It was strategy. I began drafting motions, reviewing inheritance clauses, and tracing every cent my parents had hidden under family holdings. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it for closure. Because when love is denied, truth becomes the only justice left. Daniel noticed the change before I said a word. He asked, "Are you finally taking a case that matters?" I said, "Yes, mine." He smiled, the kind that comes from understanding something heavy. He didn't offer advice or pity, just presence. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel alone in my fight. Filing those papers was easier than I expected. Maybe because I'd already buried the daughter they wanted me to be. The clerk asked for my signature. As the pen touched paper, it didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like breathing again. Later that evening, I drove past my parents' house. Same white walls, same roses by the gate. I parked across the street, engine off, just watching. The lights were on. Laughter drifted out. The kind I used to chase. I didn't knock. Some doors aren't meant to reopen. As I drove away, I felt it. The first clean breath in years. I wasn't running anymore. I was returning to myself. My parents built their legacy on silence. I was about to rewrite it in truth. And for once, I didn't feel like their disappointment. I felt like their consequence. I didn't plan to see them again. But closure has a way of demanding an audience. When the court date was set, I drove to their house, not as their daughter, but as counsel. The air outside their gate felt heavier than it used to. Like memory itself resisted my arrival. Some battles aren't about winning. They're about finally being seen. My mother opened the door like she'd been expecting a ghost. She whispered, "Elena, what are you doing here?" I said, "Delivering something you've avoided for years." I handed her the envelope. Formal, stamped, official. Her hands shook, eyes darting from the seal to my face. I saw it then. The realization that I'd grown into the very thing they tried to silence. Then my father appeared. Luis. Still proud. Still cold. He said, "So this is who you become? Suing your own blood?" And I said, "You made sure I wasn't part of it." His face tightened. Anger, guilt, maybe both. But I didn't flinch. Because for the first time, I wasn't a child defending her worth. I was a woman demanding it. They shouted, not about the lawsuit, about everything else. About shame, about choices, about faith. Every word they threw at me felt like déjà vu. But this time, their anger didn't bruise. It bounced off armor I built from their rejection. And in that chaos, I realized something. I didn't need their approval. I needed my peace. Before I left, I said the one thing they never expected to hear. You don't have to forgive me, but you will remember me. And as I walked away, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The truth doesn't always heal, but it always ends the lie. The wedding day came like a headline I'd already read too many times. My name wasn't on the invitation, but it was on the court summons. They said I ruined everything. But the truth was, they'd ruined me first. And called it love. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about closure dressed in a suit. Some women wear white on days like this. I wore power. The church bells echoed through downtown. Guests arrived in polished cars, laughter spilling onto the steps. I watched from across the street, and an outsider turned witness. Every ring of those bells felt like an ending, not of family, of obedience. I didn't go inside. Instead, I waited for the sound I'd been chasing all these years. The moment silence finally surrendered. When the ceremony began, I handed the envelope to the court courier waiting by my car. A clean exchange. No words, no tears, just the quiet power of a woman who refused to disappear. Inside, they said their vows. Outside, I took mine. To never apologize for surviving. To never mistake silence for peace. And to never again ask for a seat at any table that requires my erasure. The bells rang again, louder this time. And for the first time, they sounded like freedom. I left before the reception began. The world kept spinning. Cars, laughter, champagne toasts. But for me, the noise finally stopped. I didn't need an invitation anymore. I'd built my own celebration of truth, of dignity, of starting over. And as I drove away, the city felt different. Not cruel, not cold, just mine. The world didn't end after the papers were served. It just got quiet in a way I hadn't known before. Not the kind of silence that hurts, but the kind that heals. I started waking up without dread. No more checking my phone for a text that would never come. No more wondering if cutting ties meant cutting off love. It didn't. It meant I could finally breathe. For the first time in years, the air around me didn't feel like permission. It felt like peace. They said I was cold, ruthless, ungrateful. But they mistook survival for cruelty. What they called rebellion was really recovery. And as I ran that morning, the ocean beside me felt like an echo. Wild, untamed, honest. The way I'd always wanted to be. A week later, the letter arrived. Not from them. Of course not. But from the court. The case was settled. My inheritance restored. My name reinstated in the record. I sat with that envelope for a long time before opening it. Not because I needed to know the result. I already knew what justice looked like. But because I needed to feel the weight of it. Every page inside was proof that I wasn't invisible, that I could be written out of their story and still write my own. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like reclaiming the version of me they buried under guilt and silence. Daniel came by that evening with takeout and wine. He didn't ask what happened. He just read my expression and nodded. We ate in comfortable silence. The kind that doesn't demand explanation. He said, "You look lighter." And I laughed softly. Maybe I finally stopped carrying things that were never mine. He smiled the way people do when they recognize their own reflection in someone else healing. For a moment, it felt like possibility, not romance, but renewal. Like the world had space again. That night I dreamed of my family. Not the way they were, but the way I once hoped they could be. We were laughing again, around a dinner table that didn't exist anymore. And for the first time, I woke up without tears. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't an invitation back. It's a release forward. It's choosing to stop standing in the doorway of someone else's silence. So I wrote them a letter. Not to send, just to let go. It said, "I hope you find peace, even if it's not with me." Then I folded it, placed it in a drawer, and smiled. Some words aren't meant to be delivered. They're meant to be lived. Months later, I stood by the ocean again. No invitation. No family. No audience. Just me. Whole. I used to believe family was blood. Now I know. It's whoever doesn't flinch when you stand in your truth. Whoever stays when love stops being convenient. They didn't invite me to their wedding, but they unknowingly invited me to my awakening. And maybe that's the better ending. Not revenge, not regret, but reclamation. Because the story they tried to silence became the one I finally told. And this time, it ends with me smiling.